Welcome back to the government report. What if I told you that our ancestors were far more advanced than we are now? Not in the way Hollywood fantasizes about aliens building pyramids. No, I'm talking about real, tangible technology that archaeologists have found and quietly filed away in museum basements. Throughout history, civilizations possessed knowledge so advanced that it challenges everything we think we know about human progress. But they didn't just lose this knowledge. In many cases, they hid it, suppressed it, and made sure it would be nearly impossible to rediscover. But in this installment of Government Report, we're going to talk about such real, highly advanced knowledge that proves our ancestors were playing an entirely different game than we thought. A machine that should not exist. In the year 1900, off the rocky coast of a small Greek island called Antikythera, a sponge diver named Elias Stadiatis made a discovery that quietly challenged everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. He was doing routine work, diving deep and pulling up whatever the sea gave him. Statues, pottery, coins, all expected, all familiar. Then came something else. Buried among the wreckage was a lump of bronze, cracked and eaten away by the sea, covered in barnacles. At first glance, it looked like scrap, but inside were gears, not one or two, dozens of them. Tiny, interlocking bronze gears, some smaller than a fingernail, all arranged with deliberate precision. This was not decoration, this was a machine. It made no sense. The finding should have shaken the world. Instead, it was boxed up and placed in a museum, where it sat largely ignored for decades. No one knew what to make of it, so it was easier to do nothing at all. When scientists finally took a closer look in the mid-20th century, the shock was immediate. The object came from a Roman shipwreck dated to around 60 BCE, but the technology inside it did not belong to that time, or so everyone believed. The device, now called the Antikythera Mechanism, was not crude or experimental. It was advanced, purpose-built, thought through. It contained more than 70 bronze components, including at least 30 precision-cut gears. These were not rough guesses carved by hand. The teeth were shaped to exact mathematical ratios tied to astronomy. Modern engineers, studying it with X-rays and scans, were stunned by how clean and intentional the design was. This level of mechanical engineering would not appear again in Europe for another 1,000 years. So, what was it for? The answer changed everything. The Antikythera Mechanism was an ancient computer, a real one. You turned a crank, and it calculated the movement of the sun, the moon, and known planets across the sky. It could predict lunar eclipses years in advance. It accounted for irregular lunar motion. Some of its predictions were accurate to within a single degree. This wasn't guesswork. It was science, mathematics, metallurgy, and engineering, working together inside a small bronze box. Pause on that idea. To build this machine, someone had to understand metal casting, gear systems, and complex astronomical cycles, not separately, all at once. That kind of knowledge does not appear overnight, which raises the most troubling question of all. This could not have been the only one. The mechanism shows signs of refinement, adjustments, corrections. It looks like the result of a long tradition, not a sudden breakthrough. Ancient writers support this idea. Cicero described machines built by Archimedes that could model the movements of the heavens and predict eclipses. These devices were known among scholars and elites. They existed, and then somehow they were gone. Every single one vanished. Why would knowledge this powerful disappear? Maybe because after Rome fell. But there may be another reason. Control of the sky meant control of belief. Eclipses terrified ordinary people. They were seen as messages from the gods. A machine that could predict them would look like divine power. Some historians believe this knowledge was deliberately restricted, kept in the hands of a few who understood its influence. If that's true, then the Antikythera Mechanism is not just a scientific marvel. It is a reminder. A high-tech battery. Now let's jump ahead to 1938. An archaeologist named Wilhelm Koenig was cataloging artifacts at the Iraq Museum in Baghdad when he came across something that made absolutely no sense. It was a small clay jar, only about 5 inches tall, with a copper cylinder inside and what appeared to be an iron rod in the center. The jar had residue on the inside that looked like it had been filled with some kind of liquid. Koenig immediately realized what he was looking at, or at least what it resembled. This looked like a galvanic cell. This looked like a battery. The object was dated to somewhere between 250 BCE and 640 CE. Baghdad was the center of the Parthian Empire at that time, a civilization that thrived in the region we now call Iraq and Iran. The Parthians were sophisticated traders, astronomers, and engineers. But a battery, That seemed impossible. Koenig's discovery triggered exactly zero interest from the mainstream archaeological community. A battery made from ancient clay and copper? Surely not. It must be ceremonial, ornamental, something else entirely. The idea was dismissed, and the artifact was filed away with thousands of others. That's where it probably would have stayed if not for a chemist named Willard F.M. Gray, who, in 1966, decided to actually test whether one of these devices would work. Gray obtained clay jars matching the description, installed copper and iron electrodes, filled them with vinegar and lemon juice, known electrolytes, and watched as the jar generated an actual electrical current. Not a lot of electricity, but measurable, real voltage. The Baghdad Battery worked. We've since discovered over a dozen of these devices scattered across the Middle East, all from the Parthian period. Some were found in pairs, which would suggest they might have been connected in series, multiplying the voltage. The Parthians, it seemed, knew how to create electricity. But here's where the really disturbing part comes in. If the Parthians had these devices, what were they using them for? Modern reproduction attempts have suggested several possibilities. Some researchers believe they might have been used for electroplating, coating objects in gold or silver using electrical current. Ancient artifacts have been found with perfect, consistent gold plating that would be nearly impossible to achieve by hand. Other researchers suggest they might have been used for medicinal purposes. Some ancient texts mention electrical treatments that sound suspiciously like what these batteries might have produced. The most troubling aspect of this discovery is how it challenges our timeline of technological development. We've always been taught that electricity wasn't discovered until the 1600s, harnessed in the late 1700s, and properly understood in the 1800s. But the Baghdad Battery suggests that some ancient civilizations understood the principles of electrochemistry well before any of that. They didn't just stumble upon it accidentally. The devices show too much design, too much purpose. Someone understood what was happening at an atomic level well enough to design it, build it, and use it. Why was this knowledge lost? Or more provocatively, why was it suppressed? The answer might lie in the Parthian Empire itself. The Parthians were a warrior culture, constantly defending their territory against Rome. They were known for keeping their technological secrets fiercely protected. Some historians believe that the battery technology, if it was indeed used for electroplating luxury items or other specialized purposes, was restricted knowledge, kept within the hands of the ruling elite. When the Parthian Empire eventually fell, that knowledge disappeared with it. No records survived, no traditions were continued. It was lost not through accident, but through the deliberate protection of it. The mathematics of God. For a long time, Egyptologists maintained that ancient Egyptian mathematics was relatively simple. They could add, subtract, multiply by duplication, and divide. Sure, they built impressive structures, but they probably just used brute force, trial and error, and experimentation. They weren't really mathematicians in the way we think of mathematicians. That was the dominant narrative for over a century. Then, in the mid-20th century, scholars started looking more carefully at papyrus scrolls that had survived thousands of years. They found something that completely contradicted the established wisdom. The Egyptians didn't just understand geometry. They understood it at a level that rivals modern mathematics. The Rhind mathematical papyrus, dating to around 1650 BCE, contains solutions to problems that wouldn't be formally solved by Greek mathematicians until centuries later. The Egyptians understood the properties of the golden ratio, which they used in their architecture and art with such consistency that it can't possibly be coincidental. They calculated the volume of pyramids and hemispheres using formulas that are mathematically correct to impressive degrees of accuracy. They understood prime numbers, fractions, and algebraic relationships. Some scholars have even found evidence suggesting they understood early forms of what would later become calculus. But here's what's truly remarkable, and genuinely unsettling if you think about it, is how this knowledge was organized. The Egyptians didn't write treatises explaining their mathematical principles the way Greek philosophers did later. Instead, mathematical knowledge was embedded in architectural blueprints, hidden in temple designs, encrypted in papyri that only the initiated could read. The priesthood of ancient Egypt controlled this knowledge. It was sacred knowledge, restricted knowledge, knowledge that was actively kept from the common people. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance. The mathematical constants embedded in its dimensions are staggering. The ratio of its perimeter to its height approximates pi to remarkable accuracy. The angles of its sides relate to the golden ratio. The proportions of its internal chambers follow precise mathematical relationships that suggest the builders understood geometry at a deeply sophisticated level. But how did they know? How did they possess this knowledge 1,000 years before formal Greek geometry? Some researchers have speculated that this mathematical knowledge didn't develop in isolation. Ancient texts mention that Egyptian priests traveled to Greece and that there was knowledge exchange across the Mediterranean. Some scholars have even suggested connections to other civilizations, that there might have been a broader network of knowledge keepers across ancient civilizations who shared mathematical and astronomical understanding. The Egyptians also possessed sophisticated astronomical knowledge that defies the conventional explanation of how they developed it. They tracked the movements of the stars with accuracy that required instruments and systematic observation over centuries. They identified precession, the slow wobble in the Earth's axis, something that wouldn't be formally explained by Greek astronomers for nearly 2,000 years. They created a 365-day calendar, despite not having leap years, showing they understood seasonal adjustments. Their astronomical knowledge was encoded in the pyramids themselves, with internal passages and chambers aligned to specific stars and celestial events. Why was this knowledge suppressed? The answer is wrapped up in power. In ancient Egypt, the priesthood held absolute control over the interpretation of the cosmos. If the common people understood mathematics and astronomy, they might challenge the priest's authority. They might predict celestial events themselves. They might realize that the priests weren't conduits to the gods. They were just men who'd been trained in secret knowledge. So the knowledge remained secret. It was taught only to a select few chosen to maintain the temples and preserve the civilization. When Rome conquered Egypt, that unbroken chain of initiated knowledge was shattered. The last of the great libraries was destroyed. The priesthoods were dissolved or absorbed into the new order, and 1,000 years of accumulated mathematical and astronomical understanding simply evaporated. What did they know that we forgot? The implications of these discoveries are genuinely mind-bending. If the Antikythera Mechanism existed, how many others were made? If the Baghdad Battery was real, what else were the Parthians creating that we'll never know about? If Egyptian mathematics was this advanced, what other calculations were they performing that we've never seen? Some of this knowledge may have been deliberately preserved in ways we haven't discovered yet. There are theories, some credible, some less so, about hidden chambers in the pyramids, about knowledge preserved in ancient texts we haven't deciphered, about technologies that lie waiting in archaeological sites we haven't even begun to explore. But perhaps the more important question isn't what they knew, it's what we can learn from the fact that they lost it. Advanced civilizations, with sophisticated technology and complex mathematics, still failed to preserve their knowledge when their power structures collapsed. They relied on oral traditions, on restricted priesthoods, on keeping information secret from the masses. And when the power structures fell, so did the knowledge. Maybe the real lesson here isn't that ancients were mysteriously advanced. Maybe it's that advancement without accessible education, without widespread distribution of knowledge, is fragile. It can disappear in a generation. The civilizations that preserved their knowledge best weren't always the ones with the most impressive technology. They were the ones that found ways to pass it on, to teach it broadly, to make sure that if one generation lost it, the next could recover it. But after hearing all this, just think, what other knowledge did ancient civilizations discover that we still haven't found? Maybe we won't find ever, because that's what they wanted.